Hey guys, Pastor Meshach here, and in today's devotional, I want to talk to you about how to become a strong Christian. One of the things that you might hear routinely in church is that the world needs strong Christians to stand up and be a powerful witness for Jesus in our world today. So today I want to just take a few minutes to tell you what that looks like and how to become a strong Christian. Now, the normal assumption is that if you want to become strong or good at anything, it requires a whole bunch of practice, right? So you've heard things like the 10,000 hour rule by Malcolm Gladwell, or phrases like practice makes perfect and things that are similar to it. Well, all of these rules suggest that if a person puts in enough work, enough practice, eventually they're going to become so good that they'll approach mastery at their craft, right? And this is all true. I mean, it's profoundly true. You won't find a bigger advocate for disciplines and practice than me. Just ask my kids who roll their eyes every time I unload one of my sermons on them. And there's so many beautiful examples of what happens when a person does commit themselves in such a disciplined way. From brilliant athletes to incredible musicians or authors, even creative and innovative thinkers. There's so many examples on the positive aspects of what a disciplined life can do for a person. But here's the problem. That approach makes a person grow strong enough to rely upon themselves when it's time to perform, right? I mean, consider, for example, this quote by Michael Jordan. This quote shows us that his practice enabled him to rely upon himself in the moment when action was needed the most. Therefore, he became self-reliant in a good way. But therein lies the problem with this approach for Christianity, because many people, in an attempt to become strong Christians, use that same approach. They start practicing various spiritual disciplines like reading the Bible or praying a lot or attending worship regularly in the hopes that by engaging in these spiritual practices, it's going to make them strong and enable them to respond like Jesus in certain situations. Now, if you've tried this approach for yourself, you know it's nothing short of a recipe for disaster, and it's a profound misunderstanding of how we're meant to become strong Christians. Because in our life with God, we're not meant to grow so strong that we'll eventually become self-reliant. That's not the purpose of spiritual disciplines or practices. Rather, we're meant to grow strong in the Lord. That's what the Bible says. Be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. True Christian strength is actually found in making two discoveries. Number one, how incapable we are at doing the will of God. And number two, how capable God is. It's never growing to this place where you get so spiritually strong that you can rely upon yourself. But it's realizing more and more the truth of these words from Jesus: without me, you can do nothing. And then from that realization, learning to rely on Him in and for all things. So don't try to become so strong that you can stand up on your own, but get really good at discovering how God's strength can enable you to stand in all of life's circumstances. Indeed, that's actually the real purpose of the spiritual disciplines. They're vehicles that help us make contact with and rely upon the God that created us. And it's when a person learns to rely upon God because they've become so familiar with their own weaknesses that the Christian life really begins to shine in this world. You know, there's actually a really good example of how this plays out in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, if you've seen those movies or read the books. So in those books, there's all these really wonderful and great and powerful characters that are all self-sufficient for the most part, right? So you've got Gandalf the wizard, you have Legolas the elf, you got Gimli the dwarf, Boromir the warrior of Gondor, even though he ruined himself. And when it's time to take care of business, these characters have the power within themselves to get things done. Even some of their names alone speak of strength. I mean, who wouldn't want to be known as Aragorn, son of Arathorn and Gilraen, also known as Elisar and Strider, the 16th chieftain of the Dunedain of the North, who was later crowned King Elisar Telcontar, the 26th king of Arnor and the 35th king of Gondor. I mean, that name just drips with strength and majesty, doesn't it? So we read those books and we're naturally drawn to these strong characters, right? Those are the ones that we want to emulate. But which characters most resemble the life of a disciple of Jesus in those books? It's not the mighty warriors, but it's the lowly hobbits with plain names like Bilbo and Frodo and Samwise Gamgee, for crying out loud. It's these characters who are resilient in their own way, but not particularly strong in the ways that we admire. And whenever they get into any real trouble, rather than rising up to the occasion and engaging in battle, they often have to cry for help and be rescued. But at the end of the saga, who ends up receiving the most praise and honor in the story? The helpless hobbits do. They ended up saving the world not because they learned to stand on their own 2 feet, but because in their insufficiency, they received help to do what needed to be done. And because of that, they're perfect models for us as disciples of Jesus. Because we also live in a world that's filled with evil that's running wild. I mean, there's social evils that are too mighty for us. Economic injustice is literally crippling the world. And don't even get me started on racism or sexism and all the other isms that are a scourge upon the earth. And those are just the external ones. We haven't even mentioned the internal battles that we're ill-equipped to fight, like temptations to pride or greed, wrath, slothfulness, etc. In the face of all these evils, we would think that we have to muster up the strength to defeat them on our own, but we can't. Indeed, we weren't even created to. Rather, like the hobbits, we were made to rely upon the strength and help of another. And this is key to being a strong Christian. True Christian strength is not, nor ever will be, self-reliance, but it's rather an awareness of one's insufficiencies and weaknesses that cause them to rely on Him who is all-sufficient and all-powerful. As St. Paul said, that's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. Because when I'm weak, then I'm strong. So Christian, if you've been trying to build your spiritual muscles so that you can wage the war on your own, I encourage you to give up on that fruitless endeavor and instead begin getting really good at relying on the strength that God has. In fact, the strength that God is. Get really good at calling on God for help, because God in the Psalms is described as the God who is a very present help to us in times of trouble. That's how to be a strong Christian. Not your strength, but God's strength. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful to you. And if it was, please consider sharing it with one person that you think it might help. And also, please subscribe if it was helpful so that you can find out about the next video that's going to be coming out. Until then, peace and goodness.